Welcome back. So today we're going to talk about something a little bit bizarre. This one is the xDuoo DM-01, otherwise known as the XBot. So a weird robot-shaped DAC amp by a company who does very, very nice DAC amps. So for some reason they decided to blend the two and give you a themed DAC amp, and that's what the DM-01 is. So what is it? They call it a cyberpunk themed headphone tube amp. It does have quite a bit of power, about 1500 milliwatts. It does have its own DAC, so it is using a CS43131. It does do MQA decoding. It does do Bluetooth 5.4. It does do aptX adaptive LDAC. I think it does L3. I think also there's a couple other Bluetooth formats that I didn't actually put there that it does support as well. So pretty good on the Bluetooth support. And it does have a single 12AU7 tube for easy rolling. You just kind of pop it into his head. It does have a hybrid design like other xDuos, so it does have a tube and it does have a transistor buffer, and that kind of gives you what they would call the best of both worlds: the smoothness of a tube paired with the resolve of a transistor buffer, and the two kind of combine into something better than each one of them separately. So what I really wanted to know, why I was kind of interested in getting this and borrowing it from Apos Audio. So I do want to thank them for letting me borrow the DM-01. So is it actually good? And I would say, I think xDuoo is a good DAC amp company, obviously. And I think this one was actually good for headphones. For IEMs, they're a bit too sensitive. This one has quite a bit of noise if you just plug an IEM into it. So I wouldn't say it's a great pairing for IEMs. It kind of sounds a little bit off, but for headphones, it sounds pretty much like an xDuoo amp as you're expecting it to sound. So I would say it's actually good for headphones. And the tube itself, the tube does give you a little bit of extra noise especially if you're plugging in IEMs. I think it was more noticeable. You can roll the tubes and maybe get them down to a little less noise than on IEMs, but in generally, I would call this one a headphone amp as opposed to something that could really be dual use with both. And it is an xDuoo amp, and it does sound like other products. And I will say they have kind of a general recipe of what they do. They tend to use warmer, smoother tuning, and that pairs well with headphones as well. There's the stock tube that they use. This is actually not the stock tube. This is I think that's the RCA tube that's in there. But the stock tubes that you get with this one, they tend to add another layer of smoothness to it. And I've kind of experienced that with previous xDuoo stock tubes. That's what they tend to be. They tend to be definitely warmer and smoother style. And the CS43131 DAC, that is really there to provide the resolve detail, but under two layers of warmth and kind of combined with the transistor buffer. So you can kind of see how there's sort of almost four layers, and they try to combine the two into something that sounds very balanced and nice. And while it gives you the tube version of warm and smooth and their house version of warm and smooth, you want that paired with the resolve of that style DAC and resolve with their transistor hybrid design on their buffer. And the two of those sort of combine into something that sounds a little bit more resolved than perhaps just the tube alone or some of the designs that don't really try to mix those two. So is the DAC actually good? And I think in this case, it simply had to shine through the tuning in the tube, which it does, right? CS43131s are used in a ton of different DACs. No different here. It's a competent style DAC. It's, as I said, it's kind of used everywhere. And all it had to do was really show through that resolve and the detail and really push those through in front of the tube and the tuning, and that's exactly what it does. But if you are used to CS43131 dongles, I think those sound a little bit different than this one does. And part of it is the xDuoo tuning, part of it is the tube. I think both of those add a layer of warmth and smoothness that you don't really necessarily get on the dongles alone. Especially if you're really used to those style dongles on their own, I think they do pair quite differently. And that was actually very interesting to me. And that was when I first read the specs of this guy. That was sort of my question was, how is this DAC actually going to pair with these two tubes? Was it going to be forward enough where you could actually get some resolve at it, or was it just going to be kind of pushed back into the background and just be kind of smoothed over. And this was going to be a very warm, very relaxed style tube amp. And I think they actually did try to blend the two together. So on the second half of this, is the amp part of it actually good? I think yes. I think xDuoo does know how to make headphone amps, and they stay true to their sound signatures. And I don't necessarily care for their stock tubes, but it's not quite as resolved as it could be. So it leans a little bit too warm, a little bit too smooth over. I think their stock tubes, they almost double down on the warm and smooth, and I don't necessarily think that's something that I prefer. I think other people maybe prefer that style. For me, you need a little bit more balance. They're already tuning them to be a little bit warmer and smoother. They didn't necessarily need to double down on the tube itself. So if you swap tubes to something a little bit more neutral, like these are the raised tubes, the core tubes, you do start to pair with the DAC and the resolve and find the balance between the warmth and the smooth sound, but still providing the detail. And that's what I'm saying. So instead of having the tube kind of double down onto the stock tuning, which is warm and smooth, if you have a little bit more of a neutral style tube that pairs well with the DAC style, and those two sort of blend together and give you a little bit more resolve, and then you still have the warm and the smooth from the tuning, that style actually worked a little bit better for me, and that's why there's an RCA tube in there as opposed to the stock tube. I think the stock tube just kind of pairs with their house sound quite well, just not necessarily the my preference for the two. So does this one sound better than Apos Audio's Gremlin? And I'll say kind of right away it does not. And on this one, again, kind of the second question I had was, how much of a difference was rolling this tube going to make in the overall sound signature of DM-01? And I'll say what I appreciate about Gremlin is exactly that. The bass sound is much closer to neutral. The tubes will sway the sound more than DM-01, and that's exactly what I like about Gremlin. I love the ability to swap tubes and get quite a bit of change in Gremlin, because Gremlin itself doesn't have this really heavy, warm, and smooth signature to it. More of a neutral style. So each tube that you put into it sounds a little bit more different. And on this one, changing tubes, you can definitely hear this tube happen to be a little bit more resolved than the stock tube. And again, when that starts to pair with the DAC itself, you start to get that a little bit more resolved, but still warm and smooth. And that was kind of a nice pairing for me. But I would say for most people, DM-01 is going to be more of a use it as is. For fans of xDuoo's house sound, and those of you who want a robot on your desk, I think you're kind of fine with the stock tubes. They'll give you a sound of kind of what you're expecting from an xDuoo DAC amp, and I think that's what they did with DM-01. And again, I would say the only caveat is probably pair it with headphones over IEMs because of the sensitivity of their output. So that is what I got on the DM-01. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and I will see you next time.